Welcome, curious minds. Today we're diving into one of the darkest and most intriguing stories of the 19th century. It took place behind the scenes of industrial Chicago, a city buzzing with the promise of innovation and prosperity. However, behind this bright facade lurked one of the greatest monsters in criminal history. Holmes. Holmes wasn't just any ordinary killer. He was considered the first documented serial killer in the United States, a man whose brilliant and calculating mind made him a sinister figure. His real name was Herman Webster Mudgett, but he adopted the pseudonym Holmes as part of his enigmatic persona. Chicago in the 1800s was a cauldron of opportunities and chaos. The city was in full expansion, attracting migrants and entrepreneurs from all corners. It was the perfect place for someone like Holmes, who knew how to exploit human weaknesses while building his empire of terror. But what made Holmes so special? He had an irresistible charm, a smooth talk that could convince anyone. His captivating smile and promises of easy wealth were deadly traps. Holmes' crimes began discreetly. He owned a pharmacy where he sold medicines and chemicals. But soon he realized he could use his knowledge for something far more sinister. His first victims were people close to him, like business partners and employees. The true differentiator for Holmes, however, was his ambition. He wasn't content with random killings. He wanted to create something bigger, something that would go down in history. That's how the infamous Murder Castle was born. The Murder Castle was much more than a building. It was a meticulously planned killing machine. Holmes designed every inch of the building to serve his macabre purposes. While constructing his castle, Holmes continued to deceive everyone around him. He appeared as a successful businessman, someone who was helping the city grow. No one suspected that behind closed doors, he was planning unspeakable horrors. Why are we so fascinated by serial killers like Holmes? Perhaps it's because they represent the darkest side of humanity. They make us question how far a person can go when they lose all empathy and morality. Chicago was the perfect stage for Holmes' crimes. The city was too busy with its own transformation to notice what was happening behind the scenes. Moreover, the 1893 World's Fair brought thousands of visitors, many of whom were never seen again. The 1893 World's Fair was a monumental event, celebrating innovation and culture. But it also provided fertile ground for Holmes, who took advantage of the constant flow of tourists to lure new victims. The Murder Castle was located near the fairgrounds, making it a deadly trap for the unsuspecting. Holmes' murders left deep marks on society at the time. Although no one knew the extent of his crimes while he was active, fear loomed over the city. People disappeared without a trace, and rumors of sinister activities circulated through the neighborhoods. Before killing his victims, Holmes manipulated them psychologically. He gained their trust by offering jobs or promises of wealth. When they least expected it, they were trapped in his deadly labyrinth. Inside the Murder Castle, Holmes kept secrets that few could imagine. There were rooms equipped with trapdoors, crematory ovens, and acid tanks. He used these tools to ensure his victims were never found. The Murder Castle was much more than just a building. It was a masterpiece of horror, carefully designed by Holmes to serve as the stage for his crimes. Built at the corner of 63rd and Wallace Streets in Chicago, the castle was an imposing structure that caught the attention of everyone who passed by. Holmes began construction of the castle in 1890, hiring different contractors to avoid anyone fully understanding the project. He constantly changed the plans, fired workers, and hired new ones, ensuring no one could piece together the puzzle. On the outside, the building looked like a modern and luxurious hotel, but inside it was a deadly labyrinth. The corridors were tortuous, with fake doors and walls leading to dead ends. Some rooms didn't even have windows, leaving his victims completely isolated. One of the most frightening features of the castle was the gas system installed in the rooms. Holmes could control the gas flow directly from his office, poisoning his victims as they slept. Afterwards, he used the furnaces in the basement to dispose of the bodies. The furnaces weren't the only disposal methods. Holmes also had torture chambers, acid tanks, and even a dissection table. He was meticulous in ensuring no evidence was left behind. The ventilation system was another crucial element of the castle. Holmes manipulated the airflow to control the environment. In some cases, he flooded the rooms with toxic gases, slowly suffocating his victims. In the basement, there was a series of secret chambers where Holmes conducted macabre experiments. Some of these rooms were equipped with torture devices, such as iron chairs with restraints and heated grates. To attract victims, Holmes advertised job openings and cheap rents at the hotel. He carefully chose his prey, preferring lonely women or vulnerable families who wouldn't raise suspicion when they disappeared. The hotel employees were also constantly at risk. Holmes frequently killed workers who knew too much or who could expose his secrets. He paid them well, but the final price was always death. Women played a central role in Holmes' life. Some were victims, others involuntary accomplices. He used his charm to seduce and deceive, creating bonds that ended in tragedy. Life in the castle was sinister. During the day, it seemed like an ordinary hotel with guests coming and going. But at night, the true purpose of the building came to light. Holmes walked the dark corridors, planning his next moves. Despite his audacity, Holmes was careful not to draw attention. He lived surrounded by luxury and ostentation, which helped mask his criminal activities. The lack of forensic technology at the time also facilitated his crimes. There were rumors of survivors who escaped the castle, but few accounts were confirmed. Some say that people working there noticed something wrong and fled before it was too late. The atmosphere in the neighborhood where the castle stood was one of fear and paranoia. Local residents began to notice an increase in disappearances and the connection to the building. However, no one had concrete evidence against Holmes. Holmes wasn't an impulsive killer. He was methodical, calculating, and extremely intelligent. Every step he took was carefully planned, from choosing his victims to the exact moment he eliminated them. But how did he do it? Holmes used his unmatched charm to lure his prey. He knew how to exploit human vulnerabilities, offering promises of wealth, love, or success. His charisma was so powerful that few could resist. One of Holmes' preferred methods was advertising job openings at the murder castle. He posted tempting ads, promising high salaries and comfortable conditions. However, these jobs were merely bait to attract victims. Women were frequent targets for Holmes. He seduced them with false declarations of love, convincing them to move into the castle or invest in his fraudulent businesses. When they least expected it, they were under his total control. Holmes also had a clinical eye for identifying lonely or vulnerable people. He sought out those with financial, family, or emotional problems. These characteristics made his victims easier to manipulate. Once inside the castle, the victims were completely at Holmes' mercy. He used fake documents to steal their identities and assets. Some were never seen again, while others simply disappeared without a trace. Holmes was a master at creating psychological traps. He isolated his victims emotionally, making them believe no one would help them. This mental control made it even easier for him to execute his plans. The labyrinthine corridors of the castle were an essential part of his modus operandi. Holmes designed the building to confuse and disorient. The victims quickly lost track of time and space, becoming completely dependent on him. Another cruel feature was the use of hermetically sealed rooms. Holmes locked his victims in windowless chambers, where he controlled the airflow and gas. In some cases, they died slowly suffocated while he watched everything from a distance. To ensure his crimes remained secret, Holmes used rudimentary but effective technology. He installed piping systems that allowed him to remotely poison his victims. This avoided any direct physical contact. The murder castle also served as a disposal machine. After the murders, Holmes used crematory ovens, acid tanks, and torture chambers to eliminate evidence. He was obsessed with ensuring no body could be found. Holmes didn't act alone at all times. He recruited accomplices, usually hotel employees, to assist in his operations. However, these collaborators often became victims when they were no longer useful. Despite his coldness, Holmes maintained an impeccable public image. He was seen as a visionary entrepreneur, someone who was helping Chicago grow. This image served as a perfect smokescreen for his crimes. The lack of official records at the time facilitated Holmes' work. There were no centralized databases or advanced forensic technology. This meant many disappearances went unnoticed by authorities. Behind every crime committed by H. Holmes, there are human stories that are often forgotten. These victims weren't just numbers or names in a police report. They had dreams, families, and lives that were brutally interrupted. One of the most well-known victims was Julia Connor, a young mother who trusted Holmes to take care of her daughter while she worked at the murder castle. Julia disappeared shortly after accepting a job as the hotel's housekeeper. Her daughter was also never seen again. Holmes used his charm to deceive Julia, promising her safety and stability. He knew she was vulnerable, alone in the big city with a young child. This vulnerability sealed her fate. Another notable victim was Emmeline Sigrand, a beautiful 20-year-old who worked as Holmes' secretary. She mysteriously disappeared after accepting an invitation to live in the castle. Her parents only learned of her disappearance months later, when it was already too late. Emmeline's story is particularly tragic because she was about to get married. Her fiancé waited for months, unaware that she had been murdered by Holmes. The case raised initial suspicions, but nothing was proven at the time. Holmes also killed people close to him, like Benjamin Pitezel, his partner in several fraudulent businesses. After deceiving Pitezel with false promises of wealth, Holmes killed him in an intentional fire. He even tried to trick Pitezel's family by pretending to help them find their husband's body. But the crimes didn't stop with Pitezel's death. Holmes also murdered 3 of Pitezel's 5 children, using them in his fraudulent insurance scams. He justified his actions by saying he was clearing the way for his greater plans. Women were often Holmes' preferred victims. He lured them with false declarations of love or job offers. Many of them were poor or newly arrived in Chicago, seeking a new life. Unfortunately, this search ended in tragedy. Moreover, Holmes had a special talent for manipulating entire families. He offered cheap rents or investment opportunities, luring husbands, wives, and children into the murder castle. When they disappeared, no one immediately suspected him. The emotional impact of these crimes was devastating. Parents lost children, husbands lost wives, and children grew up without understanding what happened to their loved ones. For these families, the trauma was never fully overcome. Many victims were never identified. Holmes was so meticulous that some bodies were never found. They may have been cremated in the castle's ovens or dissolved in acid tanks, leaving very little evidence. Historical records show that Holmes may have killed hundreds of people, but the exact number remains a mystery. The lack of forensic technology at the time made investigations difficult, and many cases simply disappeared into the archives. Despite the horror, some victims left indelible marks on history. Their names are remembered today as a reminder of how cruel Holmes really was. Their stories continue to be told to ensure no one forgets what happened. Each victim represents a wasted life, a future cut short by the insane ambition of one man. Holmes didn't see these people as human beings. He viewed them as disposable pieces in his macabre game. The capture of H. Holmes wasn't an easy task. In fact, he almost managed to escape justice completely. But, like any meticulous criminal, Holmes made mistakes that eventually led to his downfall. It all started with an intentional fire at one of Holmes' properties. He tried to defraud an insurance policy by setting fire to one of his buildings. However, the scam caught the attention of the authorities, who began investigating his activities. Detectives quickly realized something was wrong with Holmes. He had a history of fraudulent businesses and mysterious disappearances around him. The pieces of the puzzle slowly began to come together. One decisive moment was the discovery of the charred body of Benjamin Pitezel, Holmes' business partner. Although Holmes tried to pass the body off as his own victim in an insurance scam, investigators identified inconsistencies in the case. The police began searching Holmes' properties, including the infamous murder castle. What they found inside was so shocking that even the most experienced investigators were horrified. In the basement of the castle, crematory ovens, acid tanks, and torture chambers were discovered. These macabre devices confirmed suspicions that Holmes was responsible for a series of murders. Documents were also found in Holmes' offices, along with stolen identity records. This proved that he not only killed his victims but also profited from their assets and insurance. The media played a crucial role in exposing Holmes' crimes. Newspapers published sensational stories about the serial killer of Chicago, increasing public pressure for the authorities to solve the case. Holmes, however, still tried to defend himself. He used his characteristic charm during interrogations, attempting to convince investigators of his innocence. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Survivor and witness testimonies also helped build the case against Holmes. Some people who worked at the murder castle or had contact with him reported strange behaviors and suspicious incidents. The lack of forensic technology at the time made it difficult to identify all the victims. However, investigators were able to reconstruct part of the story through accounts and physical evidence found in the castle. The public reacted with shock and outrage when the details of Holmes' crimes came to light. Many couldn't believe someone could be so cold and calculating. Holmes' story became a symbol of human evil. Despite his intelligence, Holmes made mistakes that led to his arrest. He underestimated the ability of the authorities to connect his crimes and overestimated his own ability to manipulate everyone. The investigation of Holmes was a milestone in the criminal history of the United States. It was one of the first cases in which the police managed to uncover the methods of a serial killer and bring him to justice, even without advanced technology. The trial of H. Holmes was one of the most sensational in U.S. history. The media followed every detail, turning the case into a public spectacle that shocked and fascinated the country. Holmes was formally charged with the murder of Benjamin Pitezel, his partner in fraudulent schemes. Although authorities believed he had killed dozens, perhaps hundreds of people, the judicial system had to focus on cases with concrete evidence. During the trial, Holmes used all his charm and intelligence to try to manipulate the jury. He even hired renowned lawyers, but his attempts to escape guilt were in vain in the face of overwhelming evidence against him. The testimonies during the trial were chilling. Survivors and witnesses described the horrors of the murder castle, including the labyrinthine corridors, crematory ovens, and torture chambers. One of the most impactful revelations was the account of a woman who managed to escape the castle. She described how Holmes locked his victims in rooms with no exit and controlled the gas flow, slowly suffocating them. The prosecution also presented falsified documents and fraudulent insurance records. This evidence showed that Holmes not only killed his victims but also financially profited from their deaths. Despite his coldness, Holmes seemed genuinely surprised by the public reaction to his crimes. He believed his intelligence and charisma would protect him but underestimated the emotional impact his acts caused in society. The courtroom was packed every day, with journalists and curious onlookers eager to hear the macabre details of the case. Holmes often smiled at the spectators, as if he were enjoying all the attention. A defining moment was when the charred body of Benjamin Pitezel was displayed as evidence. The jurors were horrified to realize that Holmes had used the corpse in an elaborate insurance scam. Holmes' defense team tried to argue that he was mentally unstable, but this strategy failed. The evidence was clear. Holmes knew exactly what he was doing and acted with full awareness. At the end of the trial, the jury had no doubts about Holmes' guilt. He was found guilty of multiple murders and sentenced to death. It was a verdict that brought relief to many families who had lost loved ones. Holmes still tried to delay his execution by writing letters to the press and claiming innocence. He even published a controversial autobiography, where he admitted to some crimes but denied others. The media continued to cover the case even after the verdict. Newspapers published speculations about the actual number of Holmes' victims, estimating that he might have killed over 200 people. After months of trial and an avalanche of evidence, Holmes was sentenced to death. His sentence was clear. He would face execution by hanging, a fate that seemed fitting for such a cruel man. The execution was scheduled to take place at Moyamensing State Penitentiary in Philadelphia in May 1896. While awaiting his final hour, Holmes continued to manipulate those around him, trying to delay the inevitable. Holmes even wrote a letter to the governor of Pennsylvania asking for clemency. He claimed to have been diagnosed with a rare medical condition that made execution especially cruel. However, his attempts were ignored. In the days leading up to his execution, Holmes made a partial confession to his crimes. He admitted to killing 27 people, although many believed the real number was much higher. This confession was published in sensationalist newspapers, further fueling public fascination. On the day of the execution, Holmes displayed surprising calmness. He walked to the gallows wearing a black suit and hat, as if heading to a social gathering. His defiant behavior unsettled the spectators. Before being hanged, Holmes requested that his remains be buried in a concrete-sealed coffin to prevent his body from being mutilated by curious onlookers or macabre souvenir sellers. When the trap was triggered, Holmes died instantly. It was the end of one of the most notorious serial killers in history. However, his death did not completely resolve the mystery surrounding his life. Rumors began to circulate that Holmes had escaped execution. Some believed he had paid someone to die in his place, while others speculated that his body had been swapped after death. These conspiracy theories persisted for decades, fueled by the lack of clear records about Holmes' burial. In 2017, his grave was opened to verify if the body really belonged to him. The results confirmed that the remains were indeed Holmes'. Holmes' legacy, however, remains alive. He is remembered as one of the first modern serial killers, a man whose brilliant mind and calculated coldness shocked the world. His crimes inspired books, movies, and series, ensuring his story is never forgotten. Many questioned whether Holmes truly paid for all his crimes. Although executed for a single murder, the impact of his actions affected hundreds of lives. Some families never got answers about the whereabouts of their loved ones. Holmes' story also raised debates about the nature of human evil. How can someone commit such cruel acts without remorse? This mystery continues to intrigue psychologists and historians to this day. Despite his death, the murder castle remains a lasting symbol of his crimes. Although the building was demolished, stories of paranormal activities and scary events still attract curious visitors to the site. Holmes' case also helped shape how we deal with mass crimes. It exposed flaws in the judicial system and highlighted the need for better criminal investigation methods. The trial of Holmes marked a before and after in criminal history. It was one of the first widely documented cases of a serial killer in the United States, leading to changes in laws and police practices. Holmes may be dead, but his legacy lives on. He is remembered as one of the first modern serial killers, a man whose crimes shocked and fascinated generations. But what makes his story so enduring? Holmes was a pioneer in many aspects. He not only killed his victims but also turned his crimes into an industrial operation, with the murder castle functioning as a meticulously planned killing machine. Holmes' case inspired countless books, movies, and series over the decades. One of the most famous works is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson, which connects Holmes' crimes to the construction of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. In pop culture, Holmes is often portrayed as the archetype of the manipulative and intelligent serial killer. His story served as the basis for fictional characters in films like The Hands of Orlac and series like American Horror Story Hotel. Moreover, the murder castle became a symbol of terror. Although the building was demolished after the exposure of its secrets, the site still attracts curious visitors and occult enthusiasts who swear they hear voices and feel frightening presences. Holmes' crimes also raised important questions about human nature. How can someone commit such cruel acts without remorse? This debate continues to intrigue psychologists, criminologists, and philosophers to this day. Holmes directly influenced the development of laws and police practices. After his trial, authorities began adopting more rigorous methods to investigate disappearances and insurance fraud, preventing criminals like him from going unnoticed. Another lasting impact was the emergence of theories about serial killers and psychopaths. Holmes is often cited as a classic example of an individual with antisocial personality traits, someone who sees other people as mere disposable objects. Despite his cruelty, Holmes also sparked fascination with his intelligence. He was a brilliant strategist, capable of deceiving those around him while building his empire of terror. This combination of genius and evil makes him a complex and enigmatic character. Many historians argue that Holmes was a product of his time. Chicago in the 1890s was chaotic and disorganized, perfect for someone like him to exploit the system's flaws. His crimes exposed vulnerabilities that needed to be addressed. Today, Holmes' case serves as a somber reminder of the evil that can exist among us. It teaches us the importance of being wary of promises too good to be true and valuing transparency in our institutions. Holmes' story also makes us question how far humanity can go when it loses morality. He is an extreme example, but his behavior reflects traits we can all identify: manipulation, greed, and a desire for control. Although Holmes was executed over a century ago, his influence remains alive in how we discuss mass crimes and serial killers. He is a central figure in the study of criminal behavior and in understanding what motivates such acts. Ultimately, Holmes' legacy teaches us that history is marked by both progress and tragedies. While we celebrate the grandeur of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, we must also remember the lives lost in the shadows of the murder castle. Although Holmes was executed over a century ago, his story is still surrounded by mysteries and speculations. To this day, many questions about his crimes remain unanswered. One of the biggest unknowns is the actual number of victims. Holmes admitted to killing 27 people in his final confession, but many historians believe this number could be much higher. Some estimates suggest he murdered over 200 people. This discrepancy occurs because Holmes was extremely meticulous in eliminating evidence. He used crematory ovens, acid tanks, and torture chambers to ensure the bodies of his victims were never found. Another mystery involves the identities of all the victims. Many of them were migrants or vulnerable people who arrived in Chicago without close family ties. When they disappeared, no one noticed or reported them. Moreover, persistent rumors suggest that Holmes had accomplices. Although he is portrayed as a lone wolf, some believe he worked with other individuals to commit his crimes. These possible accomplices were never identified. Conspiracy theories also surround Holmes' execution. Some claim he escaped the gallows by paying someone to die in his place. These allegations gained traction after the exhumation of his grave in 2017, although tests confirmed the remains were indeed his. Holmes also left ambiguous clues about his crimes. In his autobiography, written while awaiting execution, he admitted to some murders but denied others. This raises the question: was he trying to protect accomplices or simply confuse the authorities? Another intriguing theory suggests that Holmes continued killing even after his arrest. Some accounts point to him manipulating prison staff to cover up new disappearances. However, these claims were never proven. The murder castle, the site where Holmes committed most of his crimes, also holds unrevealed secrets. Although the building was demolished, some believe objects and documents hidden in the basement may provide clues about his methods and victims. Holmes was also linked to other serial killers of the time. One of the most controversial theories suggests he may have collaborated with Jack the Ripper in a series of crimes across different parts of the world. This hypothesis, however, lacks concrete evidence. Holmes' motives are also a subject of debate. Why did he choose to live as a mass murderer? Was it pure greed, a desire for control, or something deeper? Modern psychologists suggest he exhibited traits of psychopathy, but this doesn't fully explain his actions. Another fascinating mystery is the emotional impact Holmes had on those around him. How did he manage to deceive so many victims and convince employees to indirectly participate in his crimes? His charm and charisma seem to have played a crucial role. Holmes' story also raises questions about the role of the media at the time. Sensationalist newspapers amplified his fame, turning him into an almost legendary figure. Did this exposure help create the myth of Holmes as a genius of evil? Finally, Holmes' case teaches us that some stories will never be fully unraveled. The gaps in his narrative remind us that the past can be as enigmatic as the present. We've reached the end of this dark journey through the life of Holmes, the man who built an empire of terror in the heart of Chicago. But before we conclude, it's important to reflect on the lasting impact of his story. Holmes teaches us a frightening lesson about humanity's capacity for evil. He wasn't a monster born from the shadows. He was an ordinary man who chose a dark path. This makes us question, what drives someone to cross that line? His crimes also highlight the vulnerabilities of the social and judicial systems of the time. The lack of forensic technology, centralized records, and rigorous investigations allowed Holmes to act with impunity for years. However, Holmes' case brought about significant changes. It exposed flaws that needed fixing, leading to the creation of more advanced criminal investigation methods and greater attention to mysterious disappearances. Moreover, Holmes reminds us of the importance of trusting our instincts. Many of his victims were deceived because they ignored warning signs or were seduced by promises too good to be true. Perhaps the greatest lesson is about human duality. Holmes was charming, intelligent, and charismatic, qualities that could have been used for good. Instead, he chose to explore the darker side of these attributes. His story also makes us think about how we deal with evil in our society. How do we identify and combat individuals who manipulate and destroy lives? These questions remain relevant today. The fascination with Holmes persists because he represents something we all fear, the unknown within ourselves. He forces us to confront the darkest side of human nature, even if it's uncomfortable. At the same time, his story inspires us to seek justice and transparency. If Holmes' crimes could be uncovered in such a chaotic era, imagine what we can achieve today with access to advanced technology and greater awareness. Ultimately, Holmes' legacy is a reminder that the past is never truly dead. His victims may have been forgotten by many, but their stories live on through books, movies, and series that keep their memory alive. And you, what did you think of this story? Did it make you reflect on human evil, the fragility of our institutions, or the importance of trusting your instincts? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and share it with your friends. Content like this is only possible thanks to your support and interest. Subscribe to the channel to follow more intriguing stories and historical mysteries. We have much more content like this to explore together. Enable notifications so you don't miss any new videos. Each week we bring fascinating stories that will expand your view of the world and the past. And now we've reached the true end. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey through the mind of H. Holmes. Until the next video, stay alert, because sometimes evil can be closer than we think.